Welcome everyone to this 9/11 event. Special welcome to the students that are here, as well as everyone who's here for this 16th anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy. And this is actually the 6th year of Memorial Park being here. Let me first recognize the law enforcement and firefighters emergency. If I can just raise your hand. So part of today is to remember, part is to appreciate also. We have a program, we have a special speaker, and I'm going to ask Craig Schaefer to introduce our speaker. Craig was not only a city council member, but he was instrumental in having the beam here from New York, as well as that led to the design, which really led to this place, this important place, to commemorate the tragedy. Craig?
Thank you, Mayor Byrne. Thank you, everyone, again, and welcome. It is absolutely my honor to introduce Dan Weck. Dan is a gentleman that this park, God put this park in my heart. He put me in the right place. And because of that, Dan is now a lasting brother that will always be in my heart. And thank you, Dan, and thank you for coming out here and doing this today.
Will you help me for a second? Come here. Yep.
This is Dan's jersey.
Afternoon, everybody. This is very hard for me, so just bear with me. One, I lost my voice doing a charity ride this past weekend that I'm president of, so I'll do my best to not lose my voice anymore. This jersey represents how I ended up here. I live in Maple Grove, Minnesota, 3 hours away. And on 9/11, I lived in New Jersey. So closely affected. I'm going to tell you more. But every year for me, I would go home because that's where I felt comfort. And my wife Lisa's from Minnesota, and she wanted in her heart to find a place for me where I found comfort in Minnesota. And she had a bunch of different places, and she would describe them to me and say, this beam is painted, and this one this, and this one that. And then she said, this one's raw and angled towards New York City. I said, that's the one. She goes, great, that's the farthest one away. So you just gravitate to what you feel. So I want to ask you guys something simple. I'm glad we have the kids here. So, knock, knock. 9/11. You promised you guys would never forget. And Marshall, Minnesota has showed me that they never forget. This park and what it embodies means everything to me. I work for the Department of Corrections in New Jersey, just over the water, and I never work overnights. Some of you will figure out why, but I never work overnights, and I did one time. And when I was getting off duty, that's when the second tower hit. So for me, working corrections, I was on a rescue squad at the time. I worked at a famous bar in New York, and a lot of the firefighters would come in, and I befriended a lot of them. And this jersey represents one of my friends who never came home. But he gave it to me coming in the bar one night because I watched him practice so many times. So he knew what it meant to me. But I'm going into Manhattan. Instead of going the other way to go home, I'm heading in with my badge showing while everybody's trying to leave. And there are people in this world who have a job. And there are people in this world who have a job that puts themselves in harm's way every day. They gravitate and go towards danger, like law enforcement and the firefighters. So please give me another round of applause for them and what they do every single day. Because what they do and how they protect us means everything. I work for Homeland Security, and I needed to make a change. When I moved here to Minnesota, I was going to work in a prison. I needed to find what was a good fit for me. So working for Homeland Security, I train new officers. and I'm on our insider threat team. And it's all the things that people don't know, what we call SSI. That's how I want it. So for me, going into Manhattan and seeing everything that I saw, and I was there for many days, never went home. But I don't talk about this because I have that feeling of I didn't make a difference. You do things and you can see a difference, but on that day, there were things that you couldn't see a difference. And I pray no one sees what I saw. Coming here, there's a fire truck parked over there, 4 firemen sitting on it, and it was perfect. I walked up and asked them, will you hold my jersey so I could take a picture? They could sense and feel there was more than just a picture being taken. And they came up to me a little later and asked me, what was that about? And I explained to them. And then they introduced me to Craig. Craig and I bonded immediately because Craig saw, smelt, felt what I did back home. So Craig and I have this bond where we understand it. A lot of people watched it on TV or had a family member on a plane or some way it affects everyone. And it affected me in a tremendous way. But I internalized it. It was many years before my wife, who's a good Minnesota girl, so I did right there. But she's a good Minnesota girl, and she knew there had to be something for me here. And driving here today, 3 hours, how many towns I drove through, and flags were at half-mast, fire trucks were parked with their bunker gear, just tells me I'm in the right state, I'm in the right place. And if I didn't live in Maple Grove, it would be Marshall, Minnesota, because of what this town means to me, what this park means to me, what Craig and what everyone has done means to me. So I'm doing my best to not be emotional about it and trying to explain what it is, what this park means. And I hope it means as much to you as it does to me. So when I said that knock-knock joke, a lot of people, 9/11, oh, it's tomorrow. For me, it's every single day. There's a smell, there's a sight, there's a feeling, there's a remembrance every single day. And that's so hard. But to know I'm in a state like this and there's a park like this, and I've come here many times and I don't tell Craig, but I've just come here and sat by myself and cried. And that, I can admit, it's a moving experience. It's what's happened to me in my life, but what this park means to me. So that's really, really important that you all know what this park means. So like people in Vietnam, a lot of people don't talk about it. It's the same for me. But with the encouragement of Craig and my wife, talking about it helps me. So that's why I'm here today. So I'm going to ask that question one more time. And I know there's a lot of people that just showed up now, but I'm going to ask that question one more time. Knock, knock. 9/11. Somebody started to say it. We will never forget. That's what I want to hear. So please, for me, for everyone, please never forget. Thank you. I held it together better than ever.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you, Dan. Wow. We're going to do the presentation of the wreath while Emily Dorschner graces us with her beautiful voice and a song that's dear to all of us. I'm sorry about that. And then we'll finish with a prayer from Pastor Lyle Snyder. Emily, thank you. Want to thank Officer Jim Marshall and Assistant Chief Ray Hendrickson for the placement of the wreath. Pastor, thank you.
What a wonderful thing. I actually had to navigate my way around everybody here. That's a beautiful problem to have. I love it. I do love the idea of never forgetting. I do. I will never forget, and the 10th anniversary of 9/11, it so happened that it was a Sunday. And in my tradition amongst Lutherans, we usually have all of our texts picked out years in advance. And on September 11th, 10-year anniversary, was Matthew chapter 18, in which somebody asked Jesus, "Jesus, how often must I forgive my brother? Up to 7 times. And Jesus says, "No, 70 times 7. And I think about that quite a bit. And in never forgetting, there's a cliche. And I know you'll know it because if I say it, you'll know the second half. If I say forgive and forget, that's in everybody's minds, but forgiveness is the opposite of forgetting. Forgiveness is knowing everything that happens and taking it into your heart and not letting it take a hold of you. And so forgiving is not forgetting at all. So I too hope that folks will never forget, but instead might take that lesson, touch that beam, and understand what self-giving love is. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, living God, God of all places, God of all people, God of all times. Help us to never forget. Help us to never forget the pain of September 11th. Help us to never forget other pain that comes towards us, no matter what the evil is. Whether it be people in planes intending to do us harm, whether it be weather events like Houston or Florida. When harm comes towards us, help us to be self-giving, much like emergency personnel rushing in to burning and tumbling buildings. Help us to live that message throughout our lives. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the official program. I would like to say the students, please stay. Okay. I'd like to talk about 9/11. I'd like to talk about the park. But more so, Dan has offered to take questions now that the program is over. As the true spirit that he is, he was afraid to run long, and I think he's the one guy that gets a little emotional like I do. So everyone is sure welcome to stay, and if you have questions, please, now is a great time to ask him, Dan.
How did the plane crash?
The people that took the plane over actually intentionally flew it into the towers, and then there was a third plane that flew into the Pentagon, and a fourth plane that the passengers realized it was the last plane to crash, realized that something bad was going on, and they decided that they were not going to let that plane crash into any more buildings, so they broke in and took control of it, and they crashed it into a farm field in Pennsylvania. Good question. Anybody else?
Who flew the planes?
There were some people that wanted to do us harm, and they took the planes over. They'd planned it for a long time and came up with a scheme and took the planes over, and then they used them as a weapon. Any other questions?
How did the people die?
Well, the people died in the crash, and then some of them died in the buildings. It's a terrible thing. Some of the people that were above the fire spots on the buildings actually decided that they would rather die by jumping than to die in the fire. And those are all hard decisions that those people had to make. Some of them were able to talk to their families before, but some of them couldn't.
How did small planes make a fire?
They were really big planes. They were passenger planes, and that's why people like Dan now have changed. When you go to the airport to fly on a commercial airplane, there's a lot of things they do to check to make sure that the planes are safe and that the people that are getting on the planes don't mean to do us harm. So a lot of the things that you guys would know as just being normal weren't normal before that day. Any of the adults have any questions?
I'm just wondering if the two of you have had a chance to go to Ground Zero and see the memorial.
Together?
No.
Not together, we have not.
Have you been there?
I have,
Yeah.
prior to it being completed.
I have not been there since July of 2002 when I went to actually learn the lessons learned at Fresh Kills, and that's when I found out about the beams. And then we were back at Fresh Kills in September of 2002, that week before the first anniversary of 9/11, to bring the beam back, but I did not go to Ground Zero.
And ironically enough, and sadly enough, Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, I hate that name, is where everything went. But there is a fire museum, memorial museum. I took my wife there to help her understand what I go through. So she saw things. It wasn't till I came here and she saw how I engaged with Craig and the conversations we had and the thing and the bond that was made is when she said, I get it, I see it, I feel it.
Yeah, thank you. And to kind of kills in Dutch is stream or brook. Okay, so it's fresh stream or fresh brook. Okay, it's not kills as we know kills. So the translation is really different. There's an irony in that. But the thing that Dan talks about in the moving piece that I brought back from being on top of Fresh Kills is that's where everything that came out of Ground Zero got sorted. Okay, the Army Corps of Engineers helped them set up a method. It took them about 4 weeks. 4.5 weeks to perfect the method, but they sorted every literal piece of bucket load, pail full of material that came out of Ground Zero. They screened it at least 3 times down to a 1/4 inch.
Why?
They were looking for human remains that they could return to the family so that they had something for closure. They were saying this morning on one of the programs for the anniversary to 9/11, they are not done doing DNA on the pieces that they found. Now there's a difficulty in that because there were 110 plus restaurants in that footprint. So there was a lot of other bone and tissue that were non-human, okay? But they went, the firemen, the rescue people worked on their 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 9.5 months on top of that pile on Staten Island to bring people closure. And I was able to witness that. That was how I came familiar, aware that the beam would come back. But there were sensory things there, sight, smell, touch, that are indescribable. And that's what stayed with me, and that's the relationship, that's the bond that Dan and I have. I looked in one of the forensic pails in the forensics room, and there was a piece of bone, flesh, and hair about the size of a dime. And the family was getting that back, okay? And that was substantial. And the work that those people did and the respect and the dedication that they all showed to do that work is something else that's captured here. And this is a tribute. It's a tribute to that work. It's a tribute to how we can heal and we can welcome. Like Pastor said, we can forgive because we should forgive and remember. And it talks about how we should live because it's all that selfless service that Dan and the rest of those rescue and recovery workers did. They didn't do that for them. They didn't do that for a day like today. They did it for that day. And each one of us, as we live our lives, have to think about doing that every day. It's not about us, or us as an individual. It's about us as a community. Okay? Doesn't matter what color we are. It doesn't it doesn't matter what we call our God. None of that matters. It matters that we have God in our heart and that we have our brothers and sisters in our hearts. And we're all brothers and sisters. A lot of you sitting here today were never alive. When I first started doing these, I could talk to kids that were 2 years old. Okay? All of you kids sitting here weren't alive. This is the world you know. Okay? But when you get older and you have your own children and your grandchildren, I hope you bring them back here. And I hope you let them touch the beam and read the story and listen. And don't just listen to what happened on 9/11, but think about what happened on 9/12 and 9/13 and 12/15, 2001, and then 12/15 on 2002, and where you were on September 11th, 2017, okay? And let all that make a difference in your life. Let's do some more questions.
Which piece was that from? Building 1 or Building 2?
Okay, she wants to know which piece or where this is from, Building 1 or Building 2. And thank you for knowing all that, okay? I honestly don't know. There are some numbers on the beam that if we really wanted to know, we could find out. I had a gentleman that came here with me this spring that worked at the Pentagon and did some other things after 9/11. And he believes because of the beam and the coatings that were on the beam and how the markings are that would have prepped the beam and clear, they think it was probably at the 92nd floor in the transition of the express elevators. I don't know if I want to know that because this is about 9/11. When this beam came back here, it stopped at Shanksville and spent a couple hours at that Flight 93 memorial because this beam is about 9/11. It's not just Ground Zero. It's the Pentagon. It's that farm field in Pennsylvania at Shanksville.
How did they hijack the plane?
Box cutters, they attacked the crew. It was really violent. It was as bad as you'll see in any bad movie.
Why did they crash the Twin Towers?
Because it was a symbol. It's a symbol of our society and our wealth. They look at that as arrogance. And so they did it because they thought that they had to destroy us.
One of you two actually witnessed all of that, like.
Yeah? Yep. Did that answer your question? Oh, which one witnessed? Dan did. Dan did. I did not. Okay. I didn't do anything on 9/11. I actually went there because of my work here in Minnesota to learn from people like Dan, to see what they did and how they did it to bring that back here. Minnesota had 4 targets. I don't know if you folks know that or not, but after they figured out the chatter from Al-Qaeda, the IDS Tower in Minneapolis, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, the Mall of America, and the World Trade Center St. Paul were all targets that Al-Qaeda had pinned in Minnesota. So the people that I work for were really afraid that we weren't prepared to deal with something like that. So I made 2 trips out to do lessons learned, and that's how I came in contact with the things that I came in contact with.
And sadly, one of the terrorists that took over one of the planes learned to fly a plane here in Minnesota, in Eden Prairie.
Yeah. Yes. Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the park now, okay? Because that's what the kids are here for, too. There's a lot of symbolism here, and this is the things that we wanted to pay tribute. Those of you who are sitting around the walkway, you see the pavers with the stars? Look at a star and look at the person sitting next to you. That's who that star is. Every one of those stars is a person that died that day, either in the Pentagon, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, or at the World Trade Centers. The black ones are you and me, just regular people. The red ones, there's 343 red ones, and they're the firefighters, the New York firefighters that died that day in the towers. The 61 are police and paramedics, people like Dan, that perished in the towers that day. That's who those are. Every one of those stars is you and me on a different day.
And today, those stars, many of them, are friends and family I lost that are here.
The blocks that you're sitting on, those big blocks, there's 10 of them. Gene Ernst, the architect that designed this, said that each one of those is the 10 days of September leading to the 11th. The 11th element is the beam and the firefighter. There's a flower pattern, petals, looks like a star in the center. There's 9 points on that. Those are the 9 months. September's the 9th month. As the pattern comes clean to the sidewalk, if you step right here, I'm standing in the pentagon. Okay, that's the symbol there. If you look at the base of the beam, there's 4 big apples on there. Anybody know what the Big Apple is? It's New York, right? So then somebody asked one day, how come there's 4? Well, there's 4 sides to the box, and we wanted every side to have an apple. Okay? One thing, you need to come back here at night when the lights are on, and I want you to stand right here, and I want you to look up. There's a piece of metal that's crossways, that's horizontal. When this light shines up on that, it gives a pattern of 2 towers, the shadow of 2 towers. We didn't know about that. I'd never seen this beam other than laying on its back until the day we put it up. So we didn't even know about that till the night we dedicated the park.
How long did it take to get the debris out of the area that the towers fell from?
Dan, do you want to take that? I don't even have the textbook answer. 9.5 months is the answer that I have. Okay, the bathtub was empty in 9.5 months. They had to fix the slurry wall and do some other things during that time too, but they sorted on top of Fresh Kills until the end of July, first part of August, so almost a full year that they sorted to look for remains. The day that I was there, they had actually only had 2 of the 14 lines running, and they were digging up the first month because they hadn't perfected their sorting and screening yet. They wanted to make sure they didn't miss anything. Anything else?
This beam. Is this the first beam, or
This,
a little bit about this?
okay, this was, as far as I know, the first piece that officially came back to Minnesota. I don't know that for sure. That's what they told me there. To me, it doesn't matter, but I do think it's important to know that this was something that was in Mark Claith, our fire chief, and my heart for a long time, that we needed to do something here. And for all you kids here, this park is really for you. It's for you, it's for your children and your grandchildren. And I said that before, but I really mean that, because this is part of the history that we can't lose. And for you and your family to be able to walk up here and lay your hand on this and feel the energy that's in this beam. This beam holds the energy of all those stars, all those souls, and the rescuers that are still dying today because of the impacts of the things they breathed while they were there doing their work. The things that Dan and his friends did. They all had respirators to wear, but if you've ever done that for a 12-hour day, there's times you can't breathe through that anymore, and it comes off, okay? It just comes off, and that's the way that works. I'm gonna come down here, this young man in the Green Bay Packers. Do you know you're in Viking country? You're a brave young man.
I have a question.
Okay.
How many people survived?
Wow. I'm not sure how many people survived, but a lot. I think Dan knows.
I don't know how many survived, but I know somebody who I was on the rescue squad with helped many people out, and unfortunately, he didn't make it out. So there were people that were helping. So to tally up who survived, that we don't know.
Let's get this young man here.
Did 2,000 million people die?
Nope, not 2,000 million, but a number of thousand did. Okay, but that's a good question.
The people in the plane, who did they work for?
They worked for just a whole bunch of different places. They got up in the morning. Are you talking about the people that took over the plane? They worked for a terrorist organization.
They worked for people whose ideology doesn't agree with ours, and they want to cause us harm. And they tried to do that years prior to take down the towers. That's what Craig was talking about, symbolism, why. So, how many people have been to New York City? Okay, how many been to Houston, Texas? Not as many, right? So New York City is a destination. It's a main hub in United States of America. So hurting that and the economy and everything there would speak volumes. So they're very intent on doing what they do.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's time that we kind of wrap this up. If the students hang around a little bit longer, it's up to the teachers. My work says I'm flexible today, so it's a thing called vacation. It's great. So once again, thank you everybody for being here. We appreciate it. Please come back to the park. That's the one thing the mayor promised and the city council promised when we built this park. It never closes. Okay, it's always open for business. So thank you again.